There we go. Very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay and presented by somebody wearing a rather nice shirt. I'm sure you're thinking, oh, Dan, that is a rather nice shirt, isn't it? Well, this is my favorite Greek shirt, and there's a reason for wearing my Greek shirt, not just to look good for my rather important guests who I've got on the show this evening. I'm really looking forward to chatting to both of them, but also for all of our Greek fans out there. And there is a small army of you, mostly called Nick and George, or a combination thereof. This weekend is Greek Easter, and having married very happily into a Greek family, I shall be celebrating. There is a fast of sorts until Saturday night, and then on Sunday, in Greek tradition, you eat your own body weight in lamb, and then slowly hibernate for the better part of the next month, which of course I can't do because on Monday we'll be back online with another episode of the show. But there'll be plenty of enjoyment this weekend and plenty of good wine, and to that end, I've got some wine to sample this evening, and there's an added good reason for the wine that I've got tonight, not just because two very talented young winemakers who are making some much celebrated wine, but also because 4 of the 6 wines I am trying this evening, yep, 6, I am dedicated and devoted to this show and to your wine knowledge. 4 of those 6 are white wines, and my sister-in-law Nikki is a white wine drinker and white wine only. So I want to find out which one of these I shall be taking around, possibly more than one, on Sunday for Greek Easter lunch. So I've got that to look forward to this evening. Next week, a whole pile of stuff to look forward to, including next Thursday, a celebration of International Sauvignon Blanc Day, where Matt Day from Klein Constantia headlines our guest lists. A man who is completely and I think clinically obsessed with Sauvignon Blanc, but also knows so much about the grape and its vast potential. So if you like Sauvignon Blanc, tune in. If you don't like Sauvignon Blanc, tune in, because this might change your mind. And also currently up online on our various platforms, a chat with Peter Templehoff, the acclaimed chef who's doing wonderful work at Fane and Stickman, and also at Element House, but also has a relatively new gig at Beit & Verwachting, opened last year in the Constantian Winelands. It's a fabulous restaurant. I joined him there to try some wine and to talk about his wine experiences. He's a fascinating guy, terrific chef, good mate, and that one is well worth watching. As indeed is this evening's show, not necessarily for your host, but most certainly for your guests. A little later on in the show, we head down to, I don't know if it's Somerset West or Stellenbosch, somewhere in between, I think, and find a wine estate obsessed with horses. So much so, they've even named themselves after horses. The Italian word for horse is Cavalli, and it is to Cavalli Estate and winemaker Craig Barnard that we head a little later on in the show. But first of all, we go to a man who might, and I say this with a little bit of hesitation because it's a very politically sensitive topic in the wine world, but I think he might have surpassed Adi Badenhorst for the best beard in South African wine, particularly as there are rumours that Adi's shorn off some of that wine. But I'll let you be the judge yourself, because the beard is here along with its owner, and with both of them, some of the finest wine in South Africa. Has become a cult figure in the industry, and for very good reason. A very warm welcome from Thorne Daughters, John Seccombe and Beard. Good evening.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on the show. Yeah, the lockdown's been kind to the beard growth.
Of course, what most people don't know is that 3 weeks ago you were clean shaven. So that is a very impressive effort, John Seccombe.
Yeah, impressive rate of growth.
So welcome to the show, and it is long overdue, but I'm very excited to have you with us. I've drunk much of your wine, and there's never been a bottle I haven't enjoyed, and there's much about the wine I want to discuss, and in particular these 3 bottles we're going to be sampling. But let's start with a little bit of history, and one of the smaller mysteries of the South African wine world. Now, traditionally, you go to Stellenbosch to learn about wine, and then you become a winemaker, and that is how your life unfolds. You don't go to Stellenbosch, become a computer nerd, and then go to Sussex to learn how to become a winemaker. This is not how it works, John Seccombe, and yet your story is exactly that.
Yeah, and I took a lot of grief about that early on in my career. But like you said, I did go to Stellenbosch University, where I met my wife, and her family are a lovely hotel and restaurant up in the Natal Drakensberg. So they kind of got me into the food and wine scene there, and and I think I learned to drink wine at Stellenbosch University, and I don't think that's why my parents sent me there, but I think once the wine bug bites, there's no going backwards. So I worked for Ken Forrester at his 96 Winery Road restaurant, and got exposed to all these incredible wines, met a lot of winemakers, hosting dinners there, did a lot of wine and cellar visits. And I was just, when I got out and we moved to the UK, I was like, wow, I want to pursue a life in wine. So the early years of that were in restaurants. I was serving wine, working with wine lists in the UK. And then, I decided to study winemaking in the south of England near Brighton. Which wasn't very well known at the time, but there's a huge burgeoning industry there now, mostly based around very good quality sparkling wines. So the early part of my career was there, but it gave me fantastic access to Europe, to tasting wines, from all over the world, and I think when I had the decision to either come back to Stellenbosch and study winemaking there or stay in the UK, the access to wine is what kept me there, because I think as a winemaker, one of the most important tools you've got is your palate, and you need to build that experience. I needed that worldwide exposure, and I think the trade in the UK, it's second to none in terms of exposure to wines from all over the world, so definitely didn't regret that decision.
And it's given you this unique journey. It's one I'm very pleased that we are able to take credit for, because after the 2015 Rugby World Cup, Brighton was not somewhere we looked at fondly as South Africans. But I think between you becoming a great winemaker and Percy Tau now signing for Brighton, we do have some slightly better reasons to celebrate it. Just go back a step, though, and before we come back to South Africa and your wine journey here, taking that leap, because you weren't traditionally schooled in the art of making wine. Wine, from my understanding, was more a passion, something that, like so many of us, you kind of fell in love with. But it's one thing to fall in love with wine and decide I really like it and it's quite good fun to drink it. It's quite another to decide, actually, this is going to be my life and I'm going to teach myself to make wine. It's not a course in crocheting or stamp collecting you do. It's some pretty serious learning. How big a decision was that? How hard a decision was it for you to make?
Yeah, I think it's a lot like the media industry. There's a lot of low-level jobs. There's a lot of proving yourself in the beginning. So I think you're very right in saying that, if you're not super passionate about the industry, you're going to find it very tough to get through, those first few years. But I'm a naturally quite a, what do you call it, sort of polymath. So I like doing a lot of different things. I like the physicality of it. I like the creativity of it. I like the science background. I love the food and the wine. Like you say, we're in it because we love eating and drinking. I love the people in the business. I worked in restaurants for a long time. I love the people there. And I think it's an industry that gives you a lot of different facets. Especially when you get to my stage, where you own your own business. You're having to interact and do so many things. You're having to be CFO of your company. You're having to wash barrels, you're having to interact with clients, so I think the main thing is it's never boring, and I think that's what attracted me to the industry.
So you've found yourself in the south of England, you're enjoying the industry, you've got some qualifications, you're now ready to take it all on. How did the journey take you from the south of England back to South Africa and beginning the journey here?
Well, a good friend and classmate of mine, he was a Canadian, he was a surveyor and archaeologist previously. He was also as passionate about wine. We started a business in the UK, setting up vineyards there, which he continues to run this day. I think I found him the other day. He planted about 3 million vines in the UK last year. So it grew into very serious business in the later years. But at the time we were basically knocking in posts, stringing out wire, surveying fields, and all that kind of thing. And I kind of lost touch with the winemaking side. So I pulled out of that side of the business, went back to the south of France. I was making wine there for one of the big co-op groups. And while in France, my wife got pregnant. And then, we had that decision time. Do we stay in France and carry on building a career there, all come back. We're both South African, all come back to be closer to family. And so we pulled the trigger and came back home. So, and that was quite an easy decision for me. I'd had my fill of Europe. We'd been there for about 9 years. And it was an easy decision to come back home and, get back to where it all started for me.
And a quick journey it proved to be from coming home to starting your own business, because in almost no time at all, it was home, do a bit of work, suddenly get a job at Iona, you're a winemaker, and next thing you know, you're owning your own business. It worked very, very fast for you.
Yeah, and the strange thing is, I said to my wife the other day, the decision started over a late night beer. There's another very famous winemaker called Chris Arlight of Cartology and Arlight Vineyards fame. And I drove past his cellar one evening at 10:30. We'd had a few with dinner after a long day in the cellar, and I saw his light was still on. I had a couple of cold beers still in the car with me, and as we shouldn't do, but we did. And I pulled in to see if he was still awake, and he was. He just finished cleaning the cellar. We had a couple of beers and chatted, and he said, "Look, you look like you're ready to start your own thing. If you want to, there's some space in the cellar here. Why don't you get started next year?" And, again, I just said yes. So, I'm very lucky to have my father-in-law who backed us financially in the beginning. We made a very, very small start, and we've just grown organically off the back of that.
To the point where you've now got a legion of fans. I see some of them are watching the show. Kevin Brown, John the Legend, Chief Cook, and Bottle Washer. Fantastic award-winning wines that always go down like a homesick mole. Thank you, Kevin. Good to have you watching. And William Everson, great to see you on the program, John. William, thanks for watching, amongst the people watching at the moment. The name, Thorne and Daughters, where does that come from?
So our family name's actually Thorne Seccombe, but we don't use the double barrel. And then Seccombe is regularly hashed up in this country. I've just accepted being called Seccombe, all these kind of variations. So we decided the Thorne was simpler to pronounce. And then we've got our two daughters who kind of growing up with the business. They're 9 and 11 now. And yeah, with any luck, they're in a 10, 15 years, there'll be something for them to step into there, and that's the hope.
Well, one last question before we move on to the wine, whose mantle and legend your daughters are said to inherit, and that's the actual making of the wine. I know you mentioned Chris Arlight. Am I right in saying, though, that now one of the 862 Finlaysons in the South African wine industry is currently your assistant in that regard?
I don't know if you'd like to be called an assistant, but so Peter Allen Finlayson of Crystallum fame is kind of my landlord. We rent cellar space at Gabrielskloof, which is his wife's family cellar, where he makes the wines for Crystallum and for Gabrielskloof. And ever since 2015, we've worked together in the cellar, and we get on extremely well. And we kind of bonded over that first year. It was 2013. We were all sharing cellar space with Chris Arlight, worked very well together, and we've kind of continued that relationship ever since.
It's a wonderful little community that, making some terrific wine, of which our first estate or brand this evening is a great example. Let's kick off with the first of those, and it's a wine that's got kind of really de rigueur status at the moment. I think this old vine Semillon. Those who like it, and they're a growing number, are just besotted with it. And it seems to be yet another one of these white wine niches that South Africa's really seized upon and is doing something quite special with.
Yeah, this is one of the little gems in our Venice heritage here in South Africa. Semillon used to be so common here that it was just called Groendruif, green grape, wine grape. Used to account for an enormous percentage of the plantings, and would obviously have made everything from bulk wines to sweet wines and through. And it's steadily declined over the years to a point, I think it's probably a little bit less than 1% of the vineyard area planted now is still Semillon, and very little of that is the old clonal material that we're working with. The paper kite that you've got in your glass, this vineyard was planted from old clonal material, planted in about 1963, 1964. This is on the Paardeberg Mountain, which is a granite massive in the Swartland region. So, this is the diametric opposite of, Semillon's spiritual home in Bordeaux, which is cold and wet and gray and maritime. Now we're in the Swartland. We're definitely not coastal, very much continental. It's warm and dry. But what we have here is very deep granite-derived sands. Those roots go all the way down, very, very deep. It's very easy for them to spread. I found Semillon, for me, performs the best when its roots are able to spread very easily. So Paper Kite, this vineyard is it's not stonkingly old, but it's, what are we talking, 55 years now. So, it's considerably old, produces wonderfully concentrated fruit. And these old vineyards of Semillon have come to represent a very, very significant portion of our harvest, and from the beginning, we wanted to work with our vinous heritage in South Africa, because, coming back, I'd worked overseas, I'd seen all these other regions, and I said, we've got all the building bones here in South Africa to produce great world-class wines. We just need to tap into what we've got and interpret these things in the right way.
The name Paper Kite?
So all of the wine names are named after some archetype of childhood. So a paper kite is a toy that you will find in almost every culture all over the world. There'll be some version of a paper kite. And we like these ideas of, archetypes of childhood, things that people will experience in childhood all over the world. So like the next wine that we'll taste is our Rocking Horse. Again, some version of a rocking horse exists in almost every culture, and totally independent cultures. So, we thought these are great little building blocks, especially because our kids are growing up with the business. So we like this theme of archetypes of childhood and the girls kind of growing up with the business.
There's a wonderfully playful sense to the labeling and the names that it comes through in the wine as well. Grant Saul's watching on YouTube. I really enjoy Tin Soldier 2015. We're not drinking the Tin Soldier, unfortunately, but we are drinking the one that John has just mentioned, the Rocking Horse. And on that note, Reginald Peckler joining us from Cheetah Plains up in the Sabi Sands. Nice to see you, Master John. I particularly endorse you for being the father of the Cape White. I think that beard is having an effect. Rocking Horse is indeed rocking. Cheers for creating magic in the bottle. It does indeed. And this Rocking Horse, it's become such a great success story. And I wonder, when you have wines like this, if perhaps it's even taken you a little by surprise in terms of just what a fan club it's built up.
Yeah, and I think this was born out of some experiences that I had in the Languedoc-Roussillon, in the southwest. Well, southwest is not the right description, but southwest Mediterranean of France. I found a lot of these kind of very idiosyncratic wines that kind of broke the mold a little bit, used unusual combinations of grape varietals that made these kind of really iconic wines. So when Chris Arlight and I were working together in the cellar, we obviously talked a lot about this kind of stuff conceptually, and his approach was to work with Chenin and Semillon. And then from my side, I wanted to interpret the idea of a South African wine a little bit differently. And I said, we have heritage varietals of Chenin, Semillon, Claret, but we can modernize this a little bit with Chardonnay and Roussanne, both of which don't have. It's surprising that Chardonnay doesn't actually have a very long history in South Africa. But, for me, all of those grape varietals have an ability to express place. They have an ability to produce textured, complex wines which can age. That was kind of the benchmark, to enter into that. And then I wanted to produce kind of a textural wine of the vintage. And that's how, the idea for Rocking Horse was born. Obviously we were very lucky with the 2013, it was a conceptual wine that came out very, very well in its first iteration. And then since 2013, we've just kind of fine-tuned and dialed it in. There's no recipe on the cellar wall for this wine. We tweak it each year. depending on the vineyards, we'll get more or less from each different vineyard. So it won't always have the same amount of Semillon or Roussanne or Chenin. And we've decided, that's also part of the vintage expression. So the exact makeup of that changes a little bit each year. But I think each year we can rely on Rocking Horse to be one of the top wines that comes out of the cellar. We do an enormous amount of work to put that together. And I'm extremely gratified in the last few years. It's developed a really great following.
It's also a wine that, as John suggests, does have a wonderful aging potential. I've had some that's a little older, and I'm trying hard to keep some of the stuff I do to appreciate that journey with time. It's another wonderful story of the South African white blend. And for many people, Greg Sherwood amongst them, who's written most poetically about your wine. It's John Seccombe, the white winemaker. But wait, there's more, because we've also, and probably unsurprising given that you've got Peter Finlayson as your apprentice, is that you've got a Pinot Noir here. Introduce us to your copper pot.
Yeah, so this was a little, a little side, I won't even call it a side hustle, a little bee project. So my father-in-law has a lovely restaurant up at Cleopatra Mountain Farmhouse in the Natal Drakensberg. And he kind of put the screws on me one year, and he said, no, he wants some house wine for the restaurant and for him, but he wants some Pinot. And I said, yeah, okay. And then, a dentist friend of mine said, look, he'll jump in. So we made 2 barrels of Pinot. Father-in-law got 1. I split a half with my dentist mate, and, away we went. And then my Japanese importer, my local distributor, a few of them got to taste it, and they're like, oh, this is really good. So, it's just a little side gig that's just kind of grown up and taken a life on its own. I'm very lucky to be waiting on the sidelines with some really great vineyard parcels there. This is mostly from the Overberg region, so just outside the Hemelnade Valley. And then there's a little bit of organically grown Pinot from Stellenbosch, from the Bottleray Hills. And we've just as we've accumulated these great little vineyard blocks, we've steadily grown it. It's now exported to about 5 different countries. And, the idea was what it was in the beginning was a great table wine made out of Pinot, simple, unadorned. And, and again, it's developed a really great following around South Africa.
I know that you guys have got great friendships and relationships in the area. You've name checked the key guys a couple of times already. In terms of that relationship, though, is there a little bit of quiet competition? For instance, you bring out the copper pot, and you know that in the Crystallum range, you've got some fabulous Pinot Noir there as well. Do you just rib each other a little and see who's maybe just gone one better in a particular vintage?
Well, I think there's definitely that bit of healthy competition, and I think one of the best things about it, it's kind of an ego deflation zone. So if anyone's head gets a little bit too big, we're very sure to cut them down to size and bring them back to earth. So I definitely think it's it's a very healthy competition that goes on. But I think when you make wine and when you make Pinot in the same cellar as one of the best Pinot makers in the country, I think you also have to be quite modest about your achievements.
Well, you've got plenty of people who are throwing all that modesty out the window on your behalf and celebrating cheerfully, and rightfully so. 3 terrific wines from a slightly wider range. Absolute delight to drink them now. Going forward, what's on the horizon? Are you growing? Are you expanding? Are you doing anything new, different, or you're just going to keep having fun doing what you are at the moment?
Yeah, I think each year, this year we were just releasing a small little experimental batch. So we always put feelers out. My wife said no, she wants to stop adding labels and all this, but I said she's the creative director. But we're always on the lookout for other bits and bobs. I'm intensely curious, and one of my good friends, Marilise Niemann from Memento Wines, we call it going on a shopping trip, and we go and visit vineyards, and we find all these amazing things, and we all find it very hard to say no. And I'm intensely curious, so there'll always be some experiments going on. We're steadily growing the range. I think Thorne Daughters is kind of where it needs to be. copper pot could grow a little bit more, but we just always keep an eye out. And one of the things we saw in the 2019 vintage was we went far up the west coast with a friend to some Chenin Blanc vineyards that he gets there, and the grower had some Sauvignon Blanc, and I would have said straight off the bat, no, I'm not interested in Sauvignon Blanc. But what an incredible vineyard and situation. So yeah, we've added a Sauvignon Blanc to the list. So, that's something, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said there's no chance. But, I think that's one of the great things about traveling around South Africa. You find these incredible corners, you find these amazing people working these amazing parcels of land.
And the result is people like John bringing those grapes together and giving us a terrific, terrific wine. I'm going to set a different kind of calendar appointment here, John. When the beard hits your waist, and of course, trim, chiseled, and largely fat-free waist it is, we'll have you back on with the next range of wine. And I'm fascinated to see what it is, because you're not just very good at what you do, but really creative, and you clearly have a lot of fun putting it all together. Thank you so much for joining us, and I think most importantly, thank you for giving up on the computers and turning to wine instead, because we're all the beneficiaries as a result.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks for having me.
There we go. John Seccombe from Thorne and Daughters with a couple of his whites, his old vine Semillon, which is something of the quiet rising star of the white wine scene in South Africa at the moment. Not a huge amount of it, but some really nice examples where it is available. And then that rocking horse that's it's almost a cult following, really. Drop in your white robes and chant at the moon and drink your rocking horse. It's a wonderful wine and some very pleasant Pinot Noir as well. So a good start. The bar has been set for our second guest today, who hails from that R44 stretch, the Golden Triangle, again home to some lovely, lovely vineyards and some beautiful wine. But along with tasting the wine and catching up with the winemaker, we can also have a quick look at Cavalli. And there we go. The horse emblem reflecting the name, Cavalli, the Italian for horse. And I'm not sure if it's horses or wine who are the headline act at the estate, but there is somebody who can help me with that particular conundrum. Our winemaker joins us from the R44 or just off it. Craig, very good evening. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Hi, Dan. Thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Oh, great pleasure having you on. Let's get that first question out of the way. There seems to be a near unhealthy obsession with horses at the Valley. What's the story between horses and the estate?
Well, it's something that the owners were very passionate about in their younger days. I know our general manager Lauren. She grew up riding horses, as did her dad. And after spending many years in the pharmaceutical business, they realized that they really wanted to pursue horses a bit more, and so what started off as an elaborate horse farm has now grown into a thriving wine brand, as well as a beautiful restaurant and an amazing wedding venue.
Yeah, well, you saw the pictures there on that little selection. It's a very striking venue, very striking location, with some very striking wine, which we'll jump into momentarily. Let's start, though, with your story, Craig. We heard about John, who threw away a perfectly good career in IT and decided to grow a beard and make wine. How did your wine journey kick off, and how did it take you to Cavalli?
Well, my journey is a little bit different to John's, in the sense that I grew up in Joburg, didn't actually drink any wine at that stage. And I applied to every university under the sun to study a multitude of different things. And my dad eventually just said, listen, you actually have no idea what you want to do, so you're going to take a gap year and go and figure that out. And off I went. I had a friend who lived here in Cape Town, and I was really keen to come and spend some time here. And coincidentally, the same friend knew the winemaker at Bellingham at the time, and I needed a job and he needed somebody to clean tanks. And had an interview on a Friday, and on the Monday I was put in some overalls and some gumboots, and away I went washing tanks. Had a really good harvest, and phoned my dad up and said, right, this is what I want to do. So again, packed my bags, moved down to Stellenbosch, and pretty much have been here ever since.
So not a particularly glamorous start, busy cleaning tanks on a Monday morning, but such an important part. It's very similar to the conversations I have with chefs, where starting off washing the dishes and fussing plates around the kitchen, just learning the nuts and bolts, knowing from the very beginning how the wine industry actually works.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and you know, truthfully, I actually haven't stopped washing tanks. You know, just today, been emptying all the barrels for the new red blends, and you know, it's something I really do believe in, that you've got to really put in some hard work to create this fine product, which I'm really proud of. It's been a good journey so far, and I'm looking forward to whatever the years ahead give to me.
Fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle for me. You persuaded your dad it was a good idea to go and study at Stellenbosch. You'd had a little bit of experience cleaning tanks. You're now at Cavalli and making the wine we're about to taste. What happened in between once you'd finished the study?
So after studying, I worked for a couple of wine estates in and around Stellenbosch, from Hartzenberg to Lima to Delheim. Did a harvest up in California, did a harvest in Bordeaux, and then was very fortunate to land an assistant winemaker's job at De Morganson. So I worked closely with Carl van der Merwe for 2 years. So that was 2012 and 2013. And then I took up the winemaker and viticulturist position here at Cavalli at the end of 2014. And I've been here ever since.
And it looks like it's been a fantastic journey. As you say, there is so much happening at the estate, but it's the wine we want to focus on. And we're going to kick off with the first of them. And not surprisingly, when you have a look at the name and the label, there are horses involved here as well. This is the Chenin Blanc that we are kicking off with. And it's Chenin Blanc that's not too far. There we go, the Chenin Blanc. Not too far from the godfather of Chenin, Mr. Forrester. So we know it's a good part of the Chenin Blanc making world. In terms of the Chenin that you produce, the style that you aim for, the wine that you create, is it something that you influence yourself, or is it more a case of, well, let's let the grapes and the terroir tell the story?
It's a bit of both, actually. You know, when you're the viticulturist as well, you find yourselves putting in a lot of hard graft in the vineyards. And I'm a firm believer, as I'm sure many winemakers are, that, you know, we really need to let the vineyard do the talking. So the bulk of the winemaking is actually done there, where we make sure that all the right practices are done, both in the summer and the winter periods, to make sure that by the time that the fruit arrives at the cellar, it's the best possible fruit that you can get from your vineyard. I think I'm very fortunate in the sense that, you know, as you mentioned, you know, Ken Forrester is right next door. Kleine also is a hop, skip, and a jump away, both of which are, you know, excellent Chenin Blanc producers. And this is one variety that I think Cavalli is very fortunate to have on its property, especially given its location, its terroir, the fact that it's grown on decomposed granite. You know, by the time the grapes arrive at the cellar, there's just this amazing purity and minerality to the fruit that, you know, you'd really have to do something drastic to really mess up the wine at the end. But key for me in the whole process is, you know, after you've done your crushing and you know, the fermentation in oak, the biggest factor for me is the lees. Aging on the lees is the biggest role that it can have in the wine. And I actually prefer keeping my white wines on their lees right up until bottling. And that just really helps to balance out the acidity, to keep the freshness, to keep the purity, and, you know, to really kind of express what the grape is showing from vineyard right up until bottling.
So it's drinking beautifully at the moment. This is the 2019, so it's got a little bit of time on it, and it is a wine that I think we also find in our second wine, which is our white blend. Is it the same Chenin that's in wine number 2? Yeah,
exactly the same Chenin. It's just picked at different stages and in different sections of the vineyard. I've got a very interesting vineyard in the sense that at the top of the vineyard, it tends to overcrop a little bit, and so that's the kind of fruit that I want to pick early. And the bottom of the vineyard tends to ripen a bit later. So I'm very fortunate in the sense that I've got all these different tools to play with out of one vineyard. So when it comes to the Cremello, I tend to treat the Chenin a little bit differently. And I tend to use a bit more newer wood on that, just to give the wine a little bit more structure to the wine.
Now, as well as being a very eye-catching bottle, the design is cracking. You've also got a rather interesting blend: Chenin Blanc, Tic, Chardonnay, Verdelho. There are going to be a number of people. We have a lot of people who watch the show who are still starting out in the world of wine. Introduce us to Verdelho, what it is, the impact it has, and why it found its way into this blend.
So Verdelho is a Portuguese variety, not widely planted in South Africa, but it's very interesting to, if you follow the variety, you'll be amazed at how many high-end producers and small wine, I always say small winemakers, but I mean like small boutique wineries are actually using the cultivar. We're very fortunate in the sense that we've got the second oldest vineyard in South Africa. If memory serves correct, the oldest vineyard of Verdelho is at Simonsig. And it's an amazing variety. Very similar to Sauvignon Blanc in terms of freshness. It's one variety that really loves to hang on to its acid, no matter what the ripeness of the grapes are. And a fantastic blending component because it has this amazing freshness, this amazing sort of ginger honey sort of character on the nose, and that's what you're picking up on when you're smelling the wine. You get these wafts of ginger, wafts of honeysuckle, like a very sort of like an oily waxiness kind of element that comes from it on the nose. But yet on the palate, it holds its acidity, it holds its freshness. It's got almost kind of like a citrusy element to it, and I think it's just a really great variety to be able to freshen up a wine.
I know people are probably thinking, oh, Portuguese grapes, so kind of hints of piri-piri in there and a touch of Nando's. If you are smelling that, that's not the wine. That's Ronaldo, our Portuguese producer, who you're picking up somehow online. But what you are getting, it actually reminds me, I spent some time briefly in Tunis in North Africa. We went to one of the markets where lots of people tried very hard to sell us lots of things we neither needed nor wanted. And amongst them were North African perfumes. And there is a very intense, almost slightly Middle Eastern perfume to this. It's hugely distinctive. And I find quite alluring when I put it on that nose. Yeah,
it's really amazing. It just brings this element of fragrance to the wine that I can't think of the Cremello would be any better without it. I mean, it just really is a fantastic variety to use.
All right. Like so many wines, though, when you have that big distinctive nose, the palate is quite different, and it's I like that distinction. It works really well for me. It will also, I'm sure, work particularly well with food. I've already mentioned Nando's. I'm not sure a piri-piri chicken would be the first choice. Maybe it would. But if I'm coming around for dinner with you, Craig, what are you making me to wash down my Verdelho lead blend with?
Well, I'm a huge curry fan, so I would my first go would be like a lamb rogan josh, because you've got that spiciness coming from the curry, and then you've got this amazing fragrant white wine to go with it, something that's got the acidity to handle a bit of a bite. So yeah, I would go with any sort of a curry, a Moroccan tagine, or if you're not that way inclined, like a heavy white fish, because I think the wine needs a bit of creaminess and a bit of substance to it.
All right, some very good selections. I can see myself on Uber Eats in about 25 minutes' time heading off for a lamb rogan josh. I also want to ask you, before we leave the whites, a question about the blends. I see my dear mother, who's watching from Belfast in Northern Ireland, referring to our earlier white blend from Thorne Daughters. Rocking Horse was one of our favourites too, and it was a bottle of Wanderer's Heart that got me through the night of Brexit. So thanks to John. I think that's a spelling mistake. I think it should read A Case Wanderer's Heart that got me through the night of Brexit. It was certainly needed. You mentioned earlier having spent some time in California, traveling the world. This white blend, you've got Chenin in yours, John has Chenin in his, increasingly seems to be, if not the definitive calling card, then one of the real flagships of South African wine. Would you agree? And if so, what are we doing right that's really making our white blends, and particularly those led by Chenin, stand out in comparison to other white blends from around the world?
Well, I think Chenin has this amazing versatility behind it. I mean, there's a reason why it's one of the most widely planted varieties in South Africa. Whether it's a a tank fermented Chenin or a barrel fermented Chenin or used in brandy production. I mean, there's so many different uses for the variety. And I think just the fact that it's got this amazing, our soils and our terroirs are just something to be marveled at, from the Swartland to Stellenbosch to, you name it. You can pick Chenin from all these different locations and have all these amazing blending tools to use and ultimately create such a fantastic, deep, complex wine. I think there's just something about the freedom that we have here in South Africa to be able to utilize Chenin from their various regions, whereas in France, you're kind of limited from one area. Chenin, we can take it from a multitude of areas and just create an even more complex wine.
And of course, as you can see with the Cremello, have so much fun blending it, not just with the usual suspects, but as in this case, something a little different. The Cremello, is that just playing around with the different grapes, the names, or is there something slightly more to it?
Something slightly more to it. We actually have a horse in our stable that's got like a much more golden brown color to it than your general brown or black or white horse. And Cremello is the name given to the gene encoded in the horse's DNA that gives it that golden color. And it also plays on the fact that we're in the golden triangle, and the wine tends to have a slightly more golden hue to it in comparison to, say, a straight Chenin Blanc for that matter.
I suspected it might have been more than just some playful linguistics. Let's move on to the third wine. I remember when I'm not sure if it's Monet or Monette from your team who sent us information, said, we're going to be sending you the Warlord. And that probably suggested I wasn't getting a bottle of rosé.
No, not at all. Warlord is our flagship Bordeaux blend. Powerful name for a powerful wine. We just wanted something that would, from an aesthetic point of view, really stand out on the shelf and just, really be an eye catcher, both, physically and on the taste.
And it is a wine that looks impressive, hefty, and that horse does as well. Do you have a Warlord in your stables?
We don't have a Warlord, but I do recall us having a war horse. But all the wines at some point there has been a horse or it has a horse-related element to it. So we're really trying to kind of keep Cavalli's theme centralized.
Oh, you're doing a terrific job with it. The horses are under a bit of threat, I fear, Craig, because your wine is well poised to supersede them, and this might seal the deal. It is a Bordeaux blend led by Cab, and then Malbec and Petit Verdot. So I'm not seeing any of the other two traditionals. What brought this together? What said to you, this is how I compose my Bordeaux blend?
Well, the original Warlord, which was a 2009, that was actually a 7 varietal red blend. And, a lot of those vineyards were virused and they were pulled out and, new vineyards planted. And, in consultation with many industry bodies and so on, we decided that Malbec and Petit Verdot would probably be the best varieties to plant alongside the Cab. And, after some careful playing around, we've kind of realized that was probably the right decision that we took. Each variety brings a unique element to the wine. The Cab, typical Stellenbosch Cab, brings in a nice freshness, a bit of green eucalyptus, mint, and some dark berries. The Malbec tends to bring in a bit more red berries and a bit more juicy element, and the Petit Verdot tends to bring in the nice dark color and some spice. And so for the time being, I think we're really happy with where the wine is. The blend component changes depending on vintage variation. But, who knows? There's, a whole future ahead of us. Maybe it warrants us to investigate putting in some Merlot or Cabernet Franc in years to come. But for the time being, I think that, these 3 varieties kind of, depict what, really grows well here at Cavalli and what we really want to showcase.
I think that Cab is still young enough that combined with everything else, almost could be talked into thinking I had a little whiff of Cabernet Franc in there, that greenness that comes through. But it stands really nicely as it is. And I think the key part of that, we referenced terroir a little earlier, as good as the Chenin Blanc is, and the area for making Chenin Blanc is, it is a stretch of not just South Africa, but Stellenbosch in particular, which just lends itself to really, really outstanding, big, strong red wine.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're really fortunate for our location. You know, between the decomposed granites and the coffee clip soils, the late afternoon sea breezes. You know, we get a tremendous amount of warmth during the growing season. I mean, this is the best area to be in terms of, you know, a prominent cab producing winery.
And if you're not entirely sure where the guys are, you obviously look online, but you're looking at kind of the Ernie Else area and Stellenbosch, and it's just such a great part for making red wine. It's also a great place to visit. And you mentioned a couple of things earlier, but if I'm coming down to visit you, Craig, which I have told your team I will be doing hopefully sooner rather than later, on top of some great wine, there's the restaurant, there's the horses, and if I come down, I believe I can actually go on a horse carriage ride. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. We've got a number of things that we can do at the estate. Like you mentioned, we've got the restaurant where we've got a fine dining element. If you book in advance, you can do a stable tour and come and actually visit our horses and do a horse carriage ride, as you mentioned, around the farm, where we actually stop off at the various vineyards. And if you stop off at the Chenin Blanc, you'll have a glass of Chenin, of the Philly Chenin Blanc to taste there. When you stop off at the Cab, you can taste the Colt or the Warlord, and at the Chardonnay, our MCC, and so it goes on. So you can actually really get to grips with how the wines were made and where they're grown. I think it just really kind of brings the story together. And then on top of that, we've also got an art gallery where we showcase various local artists, as well as an impressive tasting room that holds a really impressive whiskey collection.
As if there wasn't enough to drink already, we're going to polish it all off with some whiskey. All right, so we've got a South African we exported to Sussex, who came back and is making great wine now in the Overberg. We've got a Johannesburger who has taken over the R44. We heard John's vision of where he's headed. Where do you see Cavalli going from a wine perspective?
Wow, well, you know, since in the 7 years that I've been with Cavalli, the wines have really grown in leaps and bounds, and I'm really excited for what the future holds. I think a lot of our vineyards were quite young when I started, and they're really kind of starting to showcase what they've got. So I think the sky's the limit for us. I mean, we've got room to grow. We're hungry for markets. We're wanting to get our brand more and more out there. We've got a good product. So yeah, I mean, I think as many people who can come to the estate and spread the words, I think that's really what we want. It's just for people to really enjoy the wines.
All right, I can picture myself already on the back of an 8-hand tall horse. I think that's the right terminology. A bottle of wine in one hand and reins in the other, galloping through the vines of Cavalli. Craig, thank you so much. It's been fantastic trying the wine, learning a bit about your story and the Cavalli story as well. And I'm looking forward to coming down to see you and some horses and drinking some wine at the estate.
Great stuff. Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate it. It's a fantastic time sharing the space with you.
There you go, Craig Barnard. Goodbye, Johannesburg. Hello, the Winelands, and what a success story it has been, both for him personally and for the wines of Cavalli that are certainly having an impact, and one that is growing vintage by vintage. That wraps us up for what has been a really cool evening. A big thank you to both Craig Barnard from Cavalli and John Seccombe from Thorne Daughters. A chance to remind you that you should, if you're not already, and you're in South Africa, be a member of the Pick and Pay Wine Club, free of charge. Just SMS that smart shopper number and send that through to 36775. You will get 3 times the smart shopper points on all of your wine, 20% off 10 wines every single month, and deals on cases, deals on magnums, competitions. And starting from, I think it's next week, there's a great competition with Warwick where you can win over 6,000 Rand worth of wine. Look out for JD, the winemaker at Warwick, on the show with us in early May. Also look out next week, Monday evening. We're going to be talking to Lawrenceford, not just some Cup Classique, but also some rather traditionally made wine in a clay pot. And it's called the Kleiner Pot, or something to that effect. So that's Monday night. Lawrenceford, also Velterfred out in Robertson, trying some of their bubbles as well. Next Thursday, celebrating Sauvignon Blanc Day with Matt Day and a few others. And also online at the moment, Peter Templehoff and his wine and food story, and that was shot down at Bacon Verwachting a couple of weeks ago. So that wraps us up. Thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep drinking South African wine, keep supporting South African wine, and when you see people like Craig and John on the show, you realize we've got not just incredibly passionate winemakers, but guys are pretty good at their job as well. Happy drinking. Thanks for supporting the show. We'll see you again Monday evening. Have a great weekend. And to all of my Greek friends and family, happy Greek Easter. Chronia Pola, Christos Anestis. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.